Thanks, Gene, and we are back. Welcome to Season 2, Episode 16, I think, of our Lunch and Learn series, sponsored by ATSU University Information Technology and Services. And we have a bigger panel today, and we're discussing something that I think a lot of us just kind of take for granted that it happens. We're going to talk about clinical rotations at ATSU University. And so we've got rotations over several programs. We have 3 programs represented with us today. And rather than me introducing everyone, I thought it might be better if we just kind of go down the film strip, if you will, for us, and have everyone introduce themselves. So, Tammy, it looks like you're to my immediate left on my screen. So why don't we start with you, talk a little bit about who you are, what school or program you're with, and what your role is with clinical rotations.
Perfect. Thank you, Brian. My name is Tammy Cricksizer. I serve as the Assistant Dean for the clinical program at KCOM, located in Kirksville. Working directly with those students in years 3 through 4, scheduling rotations, identifying rotations, etc. I work directly with our Associate Dean, Dr. Ken Campbell, and I think you'll meet him shortly.
All right, super. And then next on my film strip is Marcia. Marcia, welcome.
Hi.
Long time no see.
Yeah.
So introduce yourself, what program you're with, and what your role is with clinical rotations.
Okay. My name is Marcia Arbizu. I am with the Arizona School of Dentistry and Oral Health here in Mesa, and I work specifically with the DM4 students, scheduling all external rotations.
All right, super. And I'm going to continue down the film strip. We've got Cherie just jumped back in with us, and so we've kind of skipped one spot on the film strip. So Cherie, will come back to you. But next I'm going to go to Dr. Ken Campbell. So Kent, introduce yourself and what your role is.
Hi, Brian. Thanks for having me. My name is Ken Campbell. I'm the Associate Dean of Academic and Clinical Affairs here at KCOM. Following 30 years of family medicine, I started here the first of this year. I work with the students through all 4 years of their education, and I work closely with Tammy Cricksizer.
All right, super. And then to the left of Kent, we have Annlee Burch. And Annlee, rather than me stealing your thunder, just introduce yourself and your role.
Okay, hi everybody. First of all, sorry the sun is so bright in here. I did try to block it, but if you can't see me, I've tried. So I am the Vice Dean of the Arizona School of Health Sciences, and with that title represent many, many programs, audiology, physician assistants, physical therapy, occupational therapy, athletic training. And I oversee Cherie Fisk, who you'll meet in a little bit, who's our clinical coordinator for our whole school, and we work together to streamline the experience for the students.
Thanks, Annlee. I guess as we continue to get better at these, we're going to have to go into lighting as well. So usually the hour before, or the day before, or a week before, as we do the rehearsals, we make sure that everyone has, headsets and web cameras, and that they work. We're going to have to expand now and get lighting, and then it'll be green screens in the background, where we'll have things that we can project over people's
right.
So. All right, I'm going to go back to Cherie, and Cherie has joined us here. And Cherie, if you would, introduce yourself and what program you're with, and then what your role is with clinical rotations.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm Cherie Fisk. I'm the clinical affairs officer for ASHES, so I work with all the programs. I work with Annlee. I process all the affiliation agreements for ASHES. I work closely with Brian and all the clinical coordinators, all the programs here at ASHES.
All right, great. So that's our panel for today. The 3 programs again: KCOM, ASHES, and all of the programs within ASHES, the ASHES school, and then all of the programs that have clinical rotations within it, and then ASDO is the 3rd. So SOMA would be the only program that we don't have a representation from that also has clinical rotations. And I think it's interesting, part of why we wanted to bring everyone together is to show a little bit of the compare and contrast between how each of the programs handles clinical rotations. There are a lot of similarities, but there are some differences too. So I thought maybe the way to start out with would be to just let each program kind of give an overview of their program and how rotations work within that program. So maybe, Kent, do you mind? Can we start with you and go through the KCOM overview first?
Certainly, thank you. We've prepared a few illustrations. I think Jean can pull those up on the screen. If you're looking at those now, I will just tell you that here at KCOM we have a very traditional four-year curriculum with 2 years spent on campus learning basic sciences and then 2 years out doing clinical rotations. We do have an early clinical experience between the first and second year where the students spend some time in an office and actually come back recharged and remember why they are enduring this the first couple of years. As you see on the slide, we have about 30 plus clinical rotation sites. Most of them have between 2 to 5 students, although we have sites who have as many as 10 or even 20, even 25 larger sites. These are very dynamic numbers as we try to have just a few slots more than we have total number of students in the class. We don't want to leave anyone unmatched, but at the same time we want to have some options available for our students. We have a directed lottery, if you will. The students pick 6 slots or 6 rotation sites in order of their preference, and then the sites actually get to pick up to half of their students ahead of time, and then the balance of which go into this lottery system. Jean, if you can go to the next slide, I think it illustrates that a little, the number of slides, this number of slots. So administratively, if you can go to the next slide, please, Jean, we have both myself and Tammy Cricksizer here on campus, and then we have regional staff, which includes assistant deans and DSMEs as well as coordinators, and these are the first line, the first contact of all of our students. They arrange rotations, they secure affiliations, etc. And that's really the first place that a student would look if they had an issue or had a desire that we weren't addressing. We meet with these people regularly on video chats, both the regional dean, DSMEs, and myself, as well as Tammy, and then the coordinators meet with the in-house coordinators and other staff here in our office on a monthly basis. It's rare a day goes by that we don't talk to a site coordinator from somewhere. And of course we have email conversations with them regularly. Turning to our curriculum, if you can go another slide, Jean, please. One more, please. You can see that during the third year on the left-hand column we have 11 4-week block rotations, the first 9 of which are required rotations, and then there are 2 elective rotations. And the students have a short period of time in which they prepare for boards and take their level 2 boards. And then in the 4th year, they have some what we consider required rotations and then some selective, which are, again, required rotations, but there's somewhat of a menu of different rotations you can do, the balance of which are then elective rotations. And those are often frequently referred to as audition rotations, and they're done where students hope to do a residency, if you will. And when the students choose their rotation sites after their second year for the 3rd and 4th year, it's typically done for 2 reasons: geographic and for residency slots, or the potential for residency slots is something a little north of 50% of our students, as well as osteopathic students nationwide, go into primary care, and for the biggest part, primary care physicians, well over half of them end up in practice within I think 100 miles of where they do their residency. So it's a big decision. Jean, if you could go to the next slide, please. This is a little bit superficial about how we grade the students during their 3rd and 4th year. The biggest part of which is the very top where it says clerkship assessment, and they are assessed by their preceptor. That's about 50% of their grade, and then by shelf exams, they take an exam at the end of each 4-week block, and to make sure that it's comprehensive, make sure that they have acquired the knowledge they need to move on, and hopefully prepare them for boards. And then we also require them to keep a log of different procedures they do, or observe or assist in, so that, and this may be helpful someday for them securing a residency. That is kind of an overview. I could ask for questions now, or we can do that at the end. It's up to you, Brian.
Yeah, that's a great overview. So, students have a base of operation, right? So they select a site, and that is distributed via lottery, is what it sounds like for the most part, after they choose their preferences. And then from there they can kind of pick and choose individual rotations with coordination from the staff at each of the different regional sites.
Correct, and it's 2 years, the first of which is pretty structured, the second year is not.
A little less
Tammy,
structured.
did I leave anything out? Ask Tammy if I left anything out.
Oh, no, I believe you covered everything. Again, the first year is much more structured. The fourth year, the student still has a lot of flexibility, although there is some structure. So yes, I think you've covered it all.
Okay, good. And we'll go into a few more questions and get into some more detail so we can talk about it in a little bit more depth too. Let's go to ASHES. And I guess maybe Annlee, we'll start with you.
Sure.
I feel bad because you guys have such a wide variety of programs. It's probably a little bit more difficult for you to explain the overview, but give it a shot.
Not at all. We're very used to that, and don't feel badly. Our variability is our strength here at ASHES. So first of all, to begin with, we have, and Cherie, you can chime in, we have 1,602 clinical agreements for our programs combined. And so they're all over the nation, and we have 2 international, one in Cambridge, England, and one in Australia. And the real issue here is that there's variability in how the students are assigned to their clinical rotations. Some programs use a lottery, it sounds like much like KCOM, but other programs don't use a lottery at all. In fact, they have their students review the clinical sites available through a software package called AcadAware, or a different type of software package, and then the students come into the academic coordinator or the fieldwork coordinator and sit down and negotiate about priorities and what might be best fit for the clinical rotation. That being said, there is a trend lately to move toward a totally student-centered model, to a model which allows for the fact that we have a lot of competition in the area in terms of clinical rotations. And so we're looking for hubs of clinical rotations in different parts of the state and in other states. Let's see. Anything else? Usually, like KCOM or similar to KCOM, we have required rotations or required content areas, for instance, acute care or neuro, and then some of the rotations as electives. So somebody can choose to do a pediatric rotation or a women's health rotation, etc. And each of the programs and professions has their own special niche in terms of semantics. OT might call their clinical site a fieldwork site. PT might call it a clinical rotation. So we have to work with that variability. And I'll bring it over to Cherie, because she works very closely on establishing contracts, on getting new sites, and so has a little bit more to say in that regard.
And each of the programs as well have their own tracking system, and some use Typhon, there's eValue, there's AdAware. So we're so diverse here. There's no one set standard protocol for any of it. So it's quite interesting, and you have to be up on all the different accreditation requirements. But we all use the same ASHES affiliation agreement. The process is still the same going through MAT, just like it is with KCOM and ASDO.
And just to follow up on Cherie, there's also variability in terms of length, the time the student spends in a clinical rotation, sometimes as short as 5 weeks in some of the programs to as long as 3 months in, for instance, the occupational therapy program. So I hope that gives you an overview of the variability.
It gets real interesting, too, because when we're doing affiliation agreements, the hospitals treat each discipline differently. So when I'm working with physician assistants, it's a totally different, a lot of times, procedure and affiliation agreement compared to audiology, PT, and OT. So we could have the same site and 2 different affiliation agreements. And then KCOM can have their own affiliation agreement, and ASDO can have their own affiliation agreement.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I think a lot of us just take for granted that our students do these rotations, but there is a lot of background work that needs to go into each of these rotations. And I think a lot of people don't even think about that or consider. You know, if you and you start doing the math, the number of options for sites that students have, there are a lot of things to track with us.
Right.
Let's go last. I don't want to leave ASDO out. So Marcia, give us a little overview on kind of how the rotations at ASDO work. My guess is it's a little bit different because you have the clinic right there on campus.
It is a little bit different, but what we do is about midway through their 3rd year, we, with the cooperation of our CCU directors, we move students into 2 groups, Group 1 and Group 2. Group 1, those students will go out on rotations designated by A1, B1, C1, and D1. Like Group 2 will go out on A2, B2, C2, and D2. And so they spend equal time out on rotation as they do in clinic. So when I have my A1 group out, my Group 2 will be in clinic, and then they flip-flop. And they're going to do that 4 times during their D4 year. Plus they have an optional summer rotation that they do. But back up a little bit on how my students select their rotations. In September of their D3 year, I send out to all my rotation sites what's called an annual site update. This annual site update will ask the sites to not only tell us how many students they'll take in certain rotation blocks, but we'll also ask about any changes that have been made in terms of the clinical services they provide, their patient mix, any changes in housing. We ask for information regarding, you know, what airport the students should fly into. We ask information of the preceptors, if there's any preceptors that have left. Are there any new ones that we need to worry about getting credentialed for the next academic year? These forms are then cleaned up a little bit, and those are presented to the students just prior to when they're preparing to select their rotations, which is in December of their D3 year. We manage everything we do on eValue. So all of the availability is entered into eValue. The students will get into eValue, look at these forms, then they will enter their preferences in eValue, and they will rank and rate them. What we tell the students is we do not promise a specific time of year they can go. We do not promise that they can travel with certain individuals, but what we do guarantee them is that they will receive something on their rotation preference list, whether it be 1 to 6. But we are very clear that if you put something as 6 or 7 or 8 on your list, you need to be prepared to go there on rotation because you're telling us that that's what your preferences are. Then in January, we ask the students to enter those preferences. We close it. I work with eValue in going in and doing what they call an schedule optimization, where it's computer-driven. All of these students are scheduled via computer. Those results are then released to the students in February. They have 1 week where they can move and shift rotations around based on maybe another student has something they want and vice versa, so they can come in and do a swap, or they can look at what's left in availability and maybe swap one out that they weren't too crazy about after they got. But once that week is up, we have students all sign an agreement that they are agreeing to go on all scheduled rotations. and those are the only changes that are made to their schedule going forward through their D4 year.
And how long did you say the rotations were for?
Their rotations are anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks in length.
Okay, and they do 4 of those.
And they do 4 of those, plus a summer rotation where they can do either clinical work, they can go on, we have some students that have a military obligation that they can go do their training. We have some students that are enrolled in their MPH program and they have their practicum requirement. So some of them choose to do their practicum requirement. We have some students in the summer that want to do research, so we allow them to do it during that time. And that typically is in May.
Okay, good. So that gives us a little bit of a sense of kind of how broad each of the different rotation programs are for the various schools. I'm curious in how each of the schools go about picking their sites. Now, a lot of it is probably history because we've had certain sites for a long time, but I'm sure that there's change within that group. We get new sites, we get rid of some old sites. How does that process work? And let's, again, go through program by program, I guess. We'll start with KCOM.
Well, as I said earlier, Brian, it's a very dynamic process. As more and more schools open and as schools increase their class size, the competition has gotten significantly greater. We are always looking to open new training sites, and we try to find them that are somewhat associated with residency slots for the students, but not always. We're not always capable of doing so. We sometimes choose not to continue affiliation, but sometimes sites continue or decide not to continue affiliation simply because there's such competition and they may be talked into taking students from another school, and they can only take their load can only be so great.
Is it mostly through just personal relationships that a lot of these affiliations are maintained?
That's exactly correct. We rely on a lot of our alumni here at KCOM. We rely on a lot of our alumni or supporters of the school, and on our reputation. We try to put out the best product we can, and as long as we continue to send good students, they'll continue to want our students. Or that's what we're operating on now. Tammy, is that correct? Did you add anything?
I'll read your lips, Tammy. Remember, you have to unmute, but it looked like that was a no. He got it all.
I think you got it all. Thank you.
Annlee, what about for ASHES? Similar? Are you guys seeing more competition for rotations?
We're seeing a tremendous. Yeah, we're seeing a tremendous amount of competition, and especially locally with all of the new programs in the Valley. But I would agree with Dr. Campbell that you maintain an affiliation and start new affiliations based on reputation of your academic clinical coordinators here at ATSU and your students' reputation and your relationships with the clinical instructors and alumni. And so, you build a base and you keep working on that base, but somebody may say, hey, I have a colleague who's just opened up a new clinic and I'd like you to come and look at it, and usually a site visit happens from one of the clinical coordinators or academic clinical coordinators, and there are criteria which they look for a quality site. Not everybody makes it into our base, so to speak. You really have to clear the benchmarks. Cherie, you want to add anything?
Yes, each program does have, you're correct, each program does have their own process for vetting a clinical rotation. For example, audiology, they personally go visit every single site before they're even accepted. And then we forgot to mention too that, for example, PA, they pay almost every single one of their sites now because there's so much competition here in the Valley. It's getting just unbelievable that way. So,
and then are we required to give a certain volume of students to each of these sites, or how does the volume get managed? I mean, is it consistent from year to year? Are there commitments involved?
Mm-hmm.
it's based on the site and how many students they want to accept each year, and it varies tremendously.
Yeah, but
year to year.
I think Brian, you brought up a really good point about commitments, because some of these site reservations, so to speak, for when your student is going to, go to the site and do their rotation, the actual reservation for that site happens a year and a half, 2 years in advance. So you're working 2 years, a year and a half in advance for the students you're going to place there. So just to give you a sense of the competition.
Marcia, what about ASDO?
Well, I guess we're in the minority. We are actually extremely fortunate in that typically we only fill just over 50% of our site availability. We have currently 53 active sites this year, out of which we match students to 49 of those, and out of that availability, we had a match of 71% of our total availability. We are lucky in that we have a lot of community health centers. Dr. Cottom obviously does a wonderful job in participating in NOAA and other organizations where ASDO's name has really made its way through a lot of community health centers, and a lot of them want to partner with us. We actually do a pretty strict vetting process when we go and accept sites. We have an application process. We do get on the phone with them and discuss the application. And prior to any students starting at a specific site, we do a full site visit, which takes about 4.5 hours, where we discuss everything from just infection control all the way through support staff. So after we do all that, obviously we also have kind of streamlined our accreditation of our sites to, we've moved towards an Evergreen affiliation agreement. So this way, in very few sites, we have to update or do affiliation agreements every 1 to 2 years. Typically now, our affiliation agreements with our sites are all Evergreen affiliations, which means that they don't expire unless one or the other parties wants to make a change or wants to cancel the agreement.
So that's just kind of an administrative thing that makes it easier to administrate.
Correct.
Good. Well, I'm going to keep the conversation going, but hopefully we're getting questions from people out there in the audience. So please don't forget about adding your questions into the little question box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try to hit those as we're going through the process. I see, do we have a question there, Jean?
We do. It's from our good buddy Randy Danielson. You may have talked about this. I came late. Will there ever be opportunities for interprofessional clinical experiences, i.e. DO students and PA at the same location in a team format?
There's a beautiful question. So who wants to take that one?
Well, I can start.
Go, Annlee.
I'll follow up.
Everyone wants that one. It is a great question, and one of the things we have an affiliation with Adelante now in ASHAs, and one of the things we're trying to develop is to try to have a clinical rotation there that's IPE oriented. But in order to do that for ASHAs, we first had to get a scope of expansion approval and start to have presence there from each of the programs. But perhaps the next step in the community health center would be to have ASHA's programs have a clinical rotation there, and then in that one site be able to have an at-the-point contact IPE type of little mini clinical rotation. So we're starting to try to move towards that, but it's somebody else can pipe in and
So the roadmap then would be, I guess, first to have simultaneous or parallel rotations amongst programs, and then once that's established, then maybe you could start doing more team interprofessional type of didactics or experiences that are more coordinated. Is that fair?
Yeah, and I was speaking just to the community health center. Of course, there are parallel rotations in the hospital settings now, but the community health center allows for some real creative work and more, I think, more manageable IPE clinical rotation.
Yeah, I wish we had Soma in, and they were invited, and something came up at the last minute, and so they couldn't participate. But yeah, I think the community health center would really add a nice dimension to the IPE perspective. Marcia, did you have something to add on that one?
Yeah, actually I do. We partner with Health Point, which is a network of health centers up in the Seattle, Washington area. And one of the things our students have been fortunate enough to do is that I know we have some DO students that go up there, and as our DO program has a partnership with Health Point as well, and our ASDO students have been able to go in and actually do a presentation on oral health screening and cancers to DO students. So it's kind of nice that they're able to do that away from campus and so far away, and then they network that way as well.
Great.
Okay, Brian, shall we do the next question before you move on?
Before we go, I just want to make sure, KCOM, do you guys have anything, thoughts on interprofessional education and rotations?
Actually, currently we are working toward having a more involved interprofessional relationship or education. As we started a dental school here just this fall, and we have shared faculty between the medical school and the dental school. As far as our students go out on rotation, we certainly promote learning not only from other physicians but from all disciplines of caregivers. But we don't have a specific curriculum that involves the students from different disciplines working together that I'm aware of.
Yeah, I think that's one of the strengths that we have as ATSU, as the university, is that we have so many programs. We really have a lot of potential for these kinds of things. And of course, me being the technical person, I think there's a lot of opportunity to use even virtual environments to do some of this kind of interprofessional education, especially in the clinical setting where they're already away from campus. So it's a way to kind of bring the campus back to the rotation sites and vice versa. So I think there's lots of opportunity there. It's just about executing on it. Okay, Jean, let's go to the next question.
Okay, this is from Michael Chang. At this point, do any of the programs have a strong need for additional rotation sites?
Always.
Yes.
Always.
Specifically, women's health rotations for the physician assistant program, it's one of the areas that we're looking in. So yes, currently as in now, that's an area that we're looking for. Women's health rotations for physician assistant program.
Okay, and this came in response to Michael Chang's question. This is from Randy Danielson. There is a huge need for behavioral psych health rotations in the PA program, as well as women's health, as Annlee mentioned. 2 core accreditation requirements.
Good.
Brian, I would add that, I'm sorry, Annlee.
No, go ahead, Ken.
I would add that the need for women's health preceptors as well as pediatric preceptors is not unique to Annlee's program. It is getting more and more difficult to find pediatric and women's health providers who are willing to take our students simply because it costs providers to take students of any discipline in time, maybe not necessarily money, but it costs them a lot of time. And so we are very appreciative of the time they give our students, and we're always looking for new preceptors so that we can spread the burden, if you will.
Okay, good.
And I love that question's coming from Michael Chang with all his work with the alumni. He can probably be helpful in that area.
Yeah, good point. I want to shift the conversation a little bit to student perspectives, and I'm wondering if there are reasons or kind of what does it take for a site to be more popular than another? Do you guys see any trends or thoughts on why students prefer certain sites over another?
Definitely.
So go ahead, Marcia. Let's start with you.
The number one thing that I always see on evaluations when it comes to popularity of sites is the clinical experience. You can have the best housing in the world, it could be in the best location in the world, but if students are only getting in to see maybe 1 or 2 patients a day and they're doing screenings and cleanings that is just not going. That rotation site is just not going to be very successful. It's about having a very dynamic rotation experience, a lot of procedures, a lot of variability in procedures, and really faculty, adjunct faculty that are very engaged in the student's process. And I can tell you, HealthPoint is I know I'm using them a lot, but they're one of our strongest rotation sites because for that very reason. I think Dr. Karen does a wonderful job in kind of facilitating that field throughout the different sites, even though they are, we send students now to 5 different HealthPoint sites. But again, it's that buy-in for all the preceptors that oversee our students that they need to make it a more dynamic rotation. Same thing with CAS. It's very different experience from HealthPoint, again, but the preceptors that are there, the dynamic of the experience, the experience and the variability of procedures, students just really, really want that because they feel like that really helps them become a lot more clinically strong as they progress through their 4th year.
Yeah, and I would add to that as well. I like to compare it to a really, a course with a really hard instructor, but an instructor that you appreciate for years and years after you leave our university. Same thing with the clinical sites. Somebody who gives you a comprehensive, clinical instructor who gives you comprehensive experience with all the quality, content, put you through the ringer, but you've learned an awful lot. And that speaks to the quality of our students, that's why the sites are popular.
Tammy, can I go to you for the KCOM perspective, because I know you've been involved in, I'm curious, how does the feedback get to students? How do students know what are good rotations? Are there both formal mechanisms? I'm sure there are informal mechanisms where, and I'm not sure which word travels faster, good rotations or bad rotations, but I'm sure there are both kinds of mechanisms. Can you talk a little bit about what some of the formal ways are?
Certainly. Students do have an opportunity to provide written feedback, but definitely word of mouth is one way students will find out. Sites that are allow a lot of hands-on, sites that allow a lot of or have a lot of experiences is probably the biggest and the best way that students will find out information. Definitely through site visits, definitely through communication with our regional representatives at the location, and just speaking with students that have been there before.
Brian,
sorry, Ken. Yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt earlier.
Oh no, I actually was going to make a comment. I was going to agree with Annlee that those professors that seem to be the hardest on you are the ones that you have the most respect for eventually because they taught you so much. I would tell you that as far as our site selection goes, while we do have a couple of sites that are preceptor-based, the vast majority, the lion's share of our sites are hospital site-based, and so there's this perception that if you go to a large medical center, you're going to see more pathology. And that's not necessarily true. A lot of these smaller sites are actually the county seat or draw on a large area around, and there's an advantage and a disadvantage to both. If you go to a smaller site, sometimes you may not have a senior resident and a junior resident, an intern and another student in line in front of you. When they say it's time to do surgery, you may be a third-year student. They say, you're the first assist. You need to open this patient or close them, or sometimes you do procedures that someone else in a large center wouldn't do until further in their education, although they may have seen a lot more of them, and they may have seen some other pathology. So it's kind of a give and take. There's advantages and disadvantages to both. It's a yin and a yang as far as site selection goes.
And how do we as programs manage that variability? I mean, I would think the accreditors would like to think that everything is standard from Site A, Site B, Site D, but there's naturally a lot of variability there. How do we try and manage that?
I can't even guarantee you that the experience on the rotation is going to be the same. If you do pediatrics in the middle of the summer or right before school starts, you're going to do a lot of physicals and vaccinations and whatnot. If you do pediatrics in January or February, you're going to see a lot of sick kids. And so we have exams at the end of each core rotation or each block, and you have to pass these exams to to illustrate that you have the competencies that you should have gained while on that service. But I can't guarantee you there's any. I can't guarantee there's not a lot of variability from site to site or rotation to rotation.
Yeah.
But I will say over and over and over again that your clinical experience is very much dependent on the student. If you jump in and you volunteer and you're available and you have an eagerness to learn, there are lots of these preceptors are teachers for a reason. They take students for a reason. They love to teach. And if you show that you're willing to do so, they are more than accommodating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Brian, the variability is a good thing because the overall reason for a clinical rotation, of course, is to move away from the classroom to get yourself in an open, not a closed environment and see if you can handle that spontaneity, that variability, that change. And so, yeah.
I was hoping someone was going to bring that up. I think that's part of what real life is, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no, and just to add on what they were saying is that variability is going to happen no matter what site you go to. We like to tell students that, life is like a roller coaster. There's some sites where they're going to be hitting on all 4 cylinders, and then you're going to have that crash, and it's inevitable. All sites go through that because you have turnover. You have people coming and going, and administration coming and going. And so we ask them to be patient during that process. But another thing that we try to do and to kind of help monitor situations at a rotation site that are a little bit concerning. After every rotation, we have what's called a debrief with our students. During that time, we ask them to go ahead, because all of our evaluations on our students, as well as the students' evaluations of the site, are all done through eValue. And so we ask them to come in and be prepared to do the evaluation on their site during that meeting. We discuss everything that's covered in the evaluation, and we break them up into groups, and so we discuss things. And a lot of times, we find things that they may not either feel comfortable putting in an evaluation to a site, or that they need some help wording it in a professional way, so that way when we do release these evaluations to the site, they're receiving good, strong feedback. Issues that we find with sites that we feel we need to continue or address, we have a kind of a debrief session of Dr. Kaufmann, myself, and Ms. Mary Bush. We sit there and we talk about the issues that the students brought up at specific sites, and we monitor those. And we have had to eliminate sites because we see a continual problem. We've tried addressing it with the sites. We've tried offering help or assistance or anything we can do to try to make it a more robust and exciting site for students to go to, but sometimes the match just isn't there, and instead of having students waste their time and the site wasting their time also, we decide to eliminate sites through that vetting process. And we've had to do it a few times, but more along the lines in terms of getting rid of sites, students kind of help us do that on their own, because sites become less and less selected during the rotation process, and that's kind of how we find out what sites are fairly weak clinically.
Sure. Jean, I'm going to kind of throw it to you for the next question, because I think it's a pretty good transition to where we want to go next, about talking about tracking.
Yes, it is. From Jonny Brennan, speaking of real life, can each program speak to what systems they have in place for students who have needs arise? Bit of a softball question, because I know there are incredible systems and dedication in place to support those needs.
So I'm going to kind of expand on that question and ask you to just fill in, how do you track all of this? How is it tracked for an individual student, an individual rotation? How is the balance tracked about, making sure students are seeing a wide enough variety of things, that people aren't gaming the system? What types of tools do you use? And what systems, I think Johnny's question was both formal systems and informal systems, are in place to kind of help with those things? Let's start with, I don't know, Ashes.
Well, ASHES, as we already talked about, is made up of several or many programs, and so there are 1 to 2 to 3 faculty members and administrators responsible solely for the clinical education of the students. And it is up to those individuals to either use a software package for a lot of the tracking, but in addition to that, countless phone calls with the clinical instructors and the sites themselves, many meetings with the students. You have to keep your eye and your pulse on that student's progress in the clinical environment as you would in a lab class. And so, you know, when issues come up, either the student brings them up or a clinical instructor will bring them up, or somehow they're going to get to the faculty member responsible for clinical education, then the student is brought in for a meeting. We talk through, get both sides, and try to correct the issue. And if it's not correctable, as Marcia already identified, then at times you need to pull the student from that site, or work on a new clinical instructor or whatever it may be. So I think in terms of in terms of tracking, the most important thing is to have enough personnel in place to manage the size of your program, and to manage the number of students in your program at all the various sites. Cherie, you want to add about any of the software tracking?
Well, also, each program has their all end-of-rotation evaluations of each site, like Marcia spoke about. There's end-of-rotation exams. There's the learning objectives that all the programs have, that they make sure that everything is being met that way. And then, yes, like I said before, we do have the 3 different, the CAD-aware, Typhon, and eValue. And then also OT has a program that's specifically designed for them too, where they track all of this as well. Yeah, it's a tremendous amount of work that all the clinical coordinators and their team has to do.
Sorry, I'm talking on mute. I was asking Cherie, do you want to put a plug in for the contract management system that we're starting to use?
How could I have forgotten that? Yes, it just started a couple months ago, and it's a university-wide contract tracking system by Novitas, and we're in the beginning stages. We have Shelley Reed with Kirksville, myself with ASHES, and then Brian, and then Matt's office, and we're all tracking our different contracts. Mine, of course, is all the affiliation agreements, along with Shelley Reed affiliation agreements, and then Brian, you're doing yours. But it's going to be a valuable database for the university. For clinical, is going to help us avoid all the contracts that I have, that SOMA has, that KCOM has, where we can have just one university-wide contract. So
yeah, it really helps. As you can see with all the different programs, you know, it helps Program A know what affiliation agreements are already in place with Program B, and it's been an issue in the past. So we didn't get to KCOM. KCOM, you want to talk a little bit about systems and tracking mechanisms?
Well, Brian, we have a very similar setup. We have all of our regional staff, regional folks, and then, of course, similar computer systems. My battery is running out, so I had to switch mine around. I'm sure I'm just a glare. Let me throw this to Tammy and have her answer that question.
Certainly. Much like Annlee mentioned before, we have objectives, we have syllabi, we offer end-of-rotation exams for our students. Regional representatives are intimately involved in the tracking. We utilize a system called New Innovations. That system will track schedules, it tracks evaluations, it tracks logs. All of the assessments that are expected of the students are included as part of the New Innovations tracking. It's available to the regional representatives, to the main campus. There are portions of it that are available to the students. So everybody is utilizing that same specific system to track and monitor and manage all of the student information. We do routine audits to ensure that students are meeting certain benchmarks, or they're at certain levels at the end of maybe midway through the third year, at the end of third year, and throughout fourth year as well. And then I'm glad that Sheree mentioned the contract tracking system. We have been working with the contract tracking system, the Novus, to hopefully avoid duplication of efforts along the way as well. So that if KCOM has an agreement, maybe ASHES has an agreement, it might be something that everybody will be able to utilize. So that's kind of it in a nutshell as far as how KCOM will be, or how we do track and monitor our students.
Good, good. I see a couple questions, and I know we're getting to the point where it's about time to wrap it up. So let's get those questions in and go from there.
Okay, the first one is from Randy Danielson. What do you do if a student fails a rotation and or you get a call from the preceptor suggesting the student may not have the needed knowledge or skills required? In other words, how do we remediate in clinical situations?
Good. Let's go in reverse order this time. We'll go with KCOM first. Remediation. How do you guys handle it?
First thing we would do is contact the preceptor and be sure that they meant for the student to fail. As they fill out their evaluation forms, we have to be confident that the rating and then their shelf exam and logs, everything adds up that they truly wanted the student to fail. If they do, then we have course directors for each of the different disciplines. And first, I'm sorry, let me step back. First, they would speak with the regional dean, and we would see if there was an issue, maybe a personal issue with that student and the preceptor. If we felt the student was really just not getting where they needed to be, according to their shelf exam or something, then we would give them some directed studies, a very intense study program, and then they would speak with one of our core rotation or discipline directors, and they would likely have an oral examination to see if they actually were at a point that we want to say that this is our student and they're capable, that we want to put them out there and verify that in fact they have the knowledge needed to continue. Is that fair, Tammy? I think that was a yes.
Yeah, yes, I think that's a fair statement. I think it's very comprehensive. So,
Marcia, how about ASDO?
Okay. Well, we manage this in several different ways. We also have the luxury in kind of identifying clinical problems with students very early on, going into their D3 year, and we manage that in a number of different ways. One of them is that the graduation requirement of ASDO is that students have to complete a minimum of 2 rotations. We tell them that they have to go on all 4, but we deliberately put a 2 rotation rule in there for students that are clinically behind. So that way they can be held back at ASDO for additional instruction from preceptors here in the clinic. When the student gets out on rotation, if there are problems, whether that be clinical problems, personnel problems, stuff like that, we immediately hear from the dental directors. And what we do is we try to remediate that problem as it happens with the student. We also empower our sites to go ahead and make decisions based on what they feel where the student is, whether that's reducing the number of patients the student is seeing, reducing the number of procedures they're doing to try to help them, maybe getting them additional guidance during procedures to help them along. We've been blessed in that we've really only, I believe, one time we've ever had to remove a student from a rotation, and that wasn't even for a clinical reason. We felt it was more a personnel conflict that really was not going to resolve itself. But other than that, I think we've managed that very well just by really overly communicating with our preceptors and allowing them to have that communication, not only to myself and Dr. Cottom, but they also have all of the phone numbers to all the CCU directors in our clinic, as well as all our specialty directors in our clinic, and they can communicate with them openly at any time.
Sure. Annlee, how does ASHES remediate?
In various ways, but I think the important thing to bring up here is that hopefully a failed rotation is not a surprise, and that there's been enough early warning that you can identify why the failure occurred, whether it's a safety issue, which is huge, or a communication issue, et cetera, et cetera. In some cases, the student will have to repeat the rotation, but in other cases, portions of the rotation can be remediated in a different setting. And in some cases, in some programs, it's a one-on-one with a certain content professor to get that student up to speed. When it really becomes a problem is when the failure of the clinical rotation happens right before the student is supposed to graduate, and then often you're in a situation where graduation may have to be delayed, etc. So again, there are various ways to remediate, and some programs have at times decided, well, I don't know whether remediation of a clinical rotation should be an option, and can we have that kind of discussion? So it's a big issue.
Yeah. All right, let's go to one last question, and then we'll wrap her up.
Okay, this question is for KCUM, and it's from Brianna Bellinger. With the first year of rotations being more structured, do students travel less during the first year? And then are the students able to stay in their region more during the first year versus the second year of rotations?
Good question.
Well, I would say yes, and I know that's not a yes and no question, but yes is the answer. Our students go to one of those sites, and they spend 9 of their 11 required 4-week blocks at that site, and so, I mean, they're at that hospital for the lion's share of the time. Now, they may choose during their 4th year to do their elective, or what I call audition rotations, at different sites. They may spend a month in Florida doing orthopedic surgery, then a month in Michigan doing neurology, then a month in Arizona doing pediatric or some other discipline. So they probably travel more in the 4th year, but the potential is there. Although some students choose to stay in an area and try to get as well known and exposed to that residency thought, or where they want to practice someday purposely and spend the whole time there. Tammy?
I would agree 100%. The 3rd year is designed, or the schedule is designed to allow the student to stay within their geographic area for the 3rd year, and gives them a lot of flexibility in year 4. So they would travel far less in year 3.
I know one of the things that we hear in various conversations is that students are showing more and more interest in traveling, especially to international rotations and doing international rotations. Are all of you guys, is that across the board, or is that not true? Are we seeing students maybe demanding is too strong of a word, but asking about opportunities for international?
I find that prospective students often want to know if we offer international rotations. It's often a question that comes up at our admissions open houses.
KCOM, do you guys hear that? Need for international?
We do have a significant number of students who request to go on international rotations. We restrict international rotations till the 4th year, at which time they have to arrange it through certain individuals. We have to secure, or we have to determine their safety, etc. Now, we have a significantly higher number of students who go on mission trips, which generally are not for credit. We try to arrange them during, say, a summer break or over the holiday break, or maybe for spring break or something. And we have several physicians, our alumni, who schedule their mission trips around our calendar, the university calendar, for us for that reason. We do have students who go on mission trips that are for credit. Most of the mission trips are not for credit, but if they work with a preceptor that month and who's going on a mission trip, sometimes we allow it. But I think we get many more requests for mission trips than we do international rotations. Although we do get requested, or we do have inquiries about it during the admission process.
Good.
As Annlee said.
Marcia, we're running out of time. You want to give just a one-word answer? Are you seeing more requests for international?
Yes, we are, and at this time we don't offer international rotations. We do have the availability for mission trips, and that is for not for credit, and we only reserve that too for students that are in good academic standing.
Good, good. I can't thank you guys enough for giving your time to do this little session. I know for me it's been enlightening just to kind of see how the programs or the processes vary different a little bit between one school and the next. Thank you very much. Any last words?
Thank you, Brian.
Good.
Thank you.
All right, thanks to everyone for watching. We've got we're trying to wrap up this season, so we're going to have one more Lunch and Learn, and we're not quite sure what the last topic is going to be. So that one's still to be determined. And then our next Break to Educate will be on May the 16th. That one's going to be at 11:30, and the topic is how to add a printer. So stay tuned. Thanks again, everyone. Appreciate it.
Bye, Brian. Bye-bye.
Bye.